Good evening, and welcome to our updated Strategies for Employment webcast. I'm Anna Bruno, and I'm your host tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement. Let's begin today by acknowledging the traditional territories of Indigenous peoples and their commitment to stewardship of the land. I'm humbled to be welcome on this land in friendship. While I'd like to acknowledge the communities of people who have cared for the land on which we work in Toronto, the Haudenosaunee, Wendat, Anishinaabeg, Chippewa, and the Mississaugas of the Credit peoples, I encourage you to acknowledge the lands on which you reside, recognizing that we are coming together today from across Turtle Island. We remember the histories of these lands has been tainted by poor treatment and the lack of friendship with First Nations who call them home. This history is something we are all affected by, as we are all treaty people in Canada. We all have a shared history to reflect on, and each of us is affected by this history in different ways. Our past defines our present, but if we move forward as friends and allies, then it does not have to define our future. Today we come together to learn from one another as we continue to learn from the Indigenous peoples of this land. Finding, keeping, and growing in a job or career can be an important part of our lives. It can also allow us to build relationships and connections, can contribute to our confidence, and can support financial security. Supports to help people with disabilities in Ontario to find a job have changed, and job seekers and their families need to understand the new Employment Ontario program. Tonight, we are speaking with Frank Fagan from Ready, Willing, and Able and Keenan Wellar from LiveWorkPlay. Both of our guests have a long history in employment and supporting the employment goals of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features on our webcast player. Above the video window, we have a Tech Help tab where you can find help with any technical issues, although most technical issues can be resolved by refreshing your browser. Below that tab, we have a Resource tab, where we have resources and links that you might find helpful as you move towards your employment goal. Finally, we have a Feedback tab with a couple of short questions about tonight's presentation. Your feedback is important to us, and we would appreciate it if you shared your experience with us. To the right of the video window is a chat box. Please post any questions or comments here, and we'll do our best to address as many of the questions as possible during the Q&A portion of the webcast. As I mentioned, we have two guests joining us tonight, Frank Fagan from Inclusion Canada's Ready, Willing, and Able, or RWA, Employment Initiative, as well as Keenan Wellar from LiveWorkPlay. Welcome to you both.
Hey, great to be here, Anna.
Thanks.
Great. Perhaps we could start with a brief introduction of the two of you. Frank, could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Ready, Willing, and Able, please?
Sure. My name is Frank Fagan. I am the Assistant National Director for the Ready, Willing, and Able project. As you mentioned, Ready, Willing, and Able is a federally funded project of Inclusion Canada and the Autism Alliance of Canada. We've been around since 2014. Our aim is to increase employment participation of persons with an intellectual disability or autism in the labor force. And so we work with employers to help generate job opportunities, which are then connected to our network of over 250 supported employment agencies, LiveWorkPlay being one of the leading ones. And then we, working in concert with the agency and the employer, support employees as they go forward in the workplace. We also offer post-secondary support for students with an intellectual disability or autism, as well as self-employment and entrepreneurial support.
Amazing. Thanks, Frank. It's great to have you back with us. Keenan, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about LiveWorkPlay, please?
Sure. I'm Keenan Wellar. I'm the co-leader and director of communications at LiveWorkPlay. We've been around since 1995 here in Ottawa, and our work is basically evenly split between community supports and employment supports. And in community supports, we do a lot of the work that Frank described. So we work with job seekers with intellectual disabilities or autistic persons, and we work with employers all across this community in the private sector and public sector for real work, real pay, and career advancement for the people we support.
Thanks, Keenan. It's so great to have you here as well. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Let's get started. When we think about a typical life, employment is an expected and quite ordinary part of life. We know it can be harder for people with disabilities to find and keep employment, though. Perhaps to get started, we should talk about what we mean when we talk about employment and what we aren't talking about. Frank, I'll give you the first question. Employment for people with disabilities has historically been based on a charity model. Things like paying people below minimum wage or volunteering or doing unpaid work in a business. Can you talk about what we are talking about when we're talking about real employment?
Sure. I mean, quite simply, real employment is that persons with an intellectual disability or autism going to work shouldn't work under any different conditions or be rewarded any differently than their colleagues without a disability. We're talking about standard pay for the position, expectations and opportunities for growth that would extend to all employees, same protections and benefits right across the board, as well as the same responsibilities and expectations in terms of output and all of those sorts of things. Certainly accommodations can be a part of that, but substantially speaking, we're not talking about a job that in any way, shape or form is structurally different from that may be held by their colleagues without a disability. And as you mentioned, I mean, charity model is certainly where it was based in the past. I think luckily we've gotten beyond that now. We haven't, as our delay has grown, certainly we've seen a change in employers. But we're very much talking about, not volunteer opportunities as the only course. We're not talking about paying stipends. We're talking about people who have the same opportunities for professional development and advancement. So it's not just this sort of one and done, thank you very much kind of thing. They should have job seekers with autism or job seekers with intellectual disability should expect and hope for no less than anybody else.
Perfect. I'm glad we're talking about this, the evolution of employment. We know that there are systemic barriers to getting a job if you have disabilities, but having the motivation to work and setting that goal is an important first step. At least I think so. Keenan, for parents watching with younger children or teenagers, can you talk about why employment or having that motivation to work is so important?
Yeah, I think it's really critical. I mean, if we just take as an example, if a person with disability is growing up in a family culture where the expectation is clearly established that yes, you get older, you get a job, you go to school, and you move forward with a career and have that kind of a life progression. If that is what is established in the culture of the family and includes, sharing the same responsibilities for chores and the rest of it, and perhaps getting jobs doing lawns or snow clearing or whatever with the neighbors, or any of the usual jobs that we all perhaps experienced as teenagers going to high school and just getting our first work experiences. If all of those sorts of things occur, the odds that post high school the person is going to enter into the world of work just go up exponentially versus if there's other expectations that any type of conversation, well, maybe that's not what's going to happen. Maybe some kind of a programmatic life is what's in line for you instead. The odds increase that those things will happen. And Frank and RWA and ourselves are certainly aligned on what we think we're talking about with employment. But the fact is there are still a lot of alternatives that take people out of the labor market. And so those opportunities are still there and can be distractions from what people could experience in the labor market if they believe that it's possible. But if they don't, there are these fallback positions which can seem attractive if you've come to believe as an individual or as a family that work just isn't possible. And sadly, those messages do get passed along, sometimes from well-meaning people, but they just don't understand the possibilities or how much things have changed. As Frank has said, it's quite a different experience than 30 years ago when LiveWorkPlay was first getting into this type of work. It was difficult. The conversations were harder and longer and more confused. And now there are times when even an employer relatively new to us will quite quickly say, "Oh, that sounds excellent. Tell me more." And that's a different conversation than we used to have.
Right. So setting up ourselves to think differently, to have that mindset that employment really is possible is an important first step. We need to believe that employment is important. What can we do to help young people prepare for employment if they're still in school, Keenan?
Yes, well, that's one of the challenges. We really need schools, first of all, to position themselves with healthy messages, even if they are lacking in the resources to support, really meaningful co-op placements, ideally paid work, promoting part-time work and summer employment is excellent outcomes if they are going to be involved in things like co-ops. But if they don't have the resources or they're not doing that, they can still participate in effective messaging about the future and creating expectations, and starting early to direct families to information, even if they're, too young to participate in Employment Ontario or something of that nature. They can still do the research and start having conversations and preparing themselves for those types of outcomes, and not waiting until that first summer when school is over and what do we do now? So you want to start a lot earlier than that with the expectations. Educators can really help by just making those connections and having positive conversations, I think.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Keenan. Frank, let's stay in this conversation about young people or people who may not have had much work experience. We want early work experiences to be positive. So we often talk about skill development or job skills training to help people be successful. It's certainly important that we bring some skills to our jobs, but how important is formal skills training versus having some confidence and independence when we get our first job?
Well, I mean, the reality is we all came unskilled into this. Everybody gets a first job. Everybody enters the workforce without sort of bucket loads of training. I think, for a long time, we talked about the charity model. I think for a long time, sort of moving, the first evolution of that was this idea of train in place, where you could just create this kind of like employee very tailored to a specific job. You would put he, him, them into them, or her, and that would be set for life. I mean, that's long, we've long abandoned that. The reality is, I think confidence, motivation, the things that Keenan talked about, these are the vital things. It's the expectation that you can get a job, you should get a job, you will get a job, and that, like all of us, you will probably cycle through jobs. So we can't be sort of this kind of stagnation by pre-employment where people are just endlessly trained for a context that is unknowable, unseeable, and never stops. I mean, that's just it's a day program by another name. I mean, to put it bluntly. So I think it's about having those sort of, basic life skills that we all work on, that we all do, that we all had at that age, getting some guidance, particularly with an agency. This is where the LiveWorkPlay, the great agencies of the world come in. They can work with people, understand what their ambitions are, what their motivations are, where they want to go, what their interests are, polish those few skills that are needed at the beginning, the resume building, that kind of thing, and then get out there and realize that we can't be hung up on the fact that every first job needs to be a stellar success right out of the gate. It's not true for any of us. I mean, I'm certainly not doing the first job I did. None of you are. No one listening to this probably is. So the reality is it's going to be getting out there, working in there, finding what fits, finding what doesn't, finding if you fit the job and vice versa, and finding your way through it. And that, again, goes back to what we mean by an inclusive employment trajectory. People should have the ability to fail as well as succeed, and to fail safe, and to move on, and to find something else. So I think willingness, motivation, support, and a belief that you should and you will, quite frankly, are the only real bona fide necessary skills pre-employment wise that anybody needs before they get their first job.
And well, an excellent reminder. So real experiences, real opportunity to succeed or fail or figure things out. Keenan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's pretty brilliantly said. I would just add, as you're getting to know the person and the kind of career they're looking for, there could be very specific trainings that anyone who wants to do that kind of work needs to complete, in which case they go do that with other people, and we would support them to, whatever hoops and hurdles there might be to getting that done. But then also, what is the training plan you develop with the employer? I mean, because this is kind of the farce or the folly of the pre-employment, because you don't know where this person's going to end up and what that employer's training expectations are. So why are we pretending that we know what's needed? So if we're working with a particular food services company, for example, they are going to have their own training program. And where we might come in is, okay, there's a few things we can see here. Can we adapt this? Because this person's going to be excellent for you, but I can see how the way you've organized this module, these open-ended questions or abstractions are probably not going to work for this person, even though it won't affect their job performance at all. So how can we adapt this training so it's successful for all? And that's to me, a much better investment. If employment providers are going to be involved in training, it's working with the employer to make sure their training is accessible And the real bonus of that is you're not only helping that one person, but probably for the future, that employer is improving their training, and they'll find out all kinds of other candidates are finding this easier and better. And so we like to be, a part of the solution beyond just accessibility for one person who might need a few adaptations.
Fantastic. I love the way that you're thinking about making employment training more accessible right from the level of the employer. We talked about getting people ready and motivated to work. Maybe we should talk a bit about employers and where they're at. Frank, RWA works quite closely with businesses. Can you talk about what employers are looking for when they hire?
They're looking for somebody to do the job. I mean, which is, hopelessly basic an answer, but it is true. They're looking for good employees, dependable employees. They're looking for people who are reliable, who do the job. They're not looking for someone to probably do the job for life. That's a ridiculous expectation I don't think anybody has anymore. Too often we kind of celebrate for a long time in supported employment. Person X has been in this entry-level role for 750 years, and hurrah, that's success, if that's where they want to be. But for too often, it's just where they've been put, and they don't have an opportunity to advance. So employers are looking for somebody who can get in there, do the job, and do it well. I think the change comes in sometimes how the job is done, and that's where we can work with employers. We're LiveWorkPlay, we work with employers. We're looking at employer expectations in terms of not being so rigid about the way jobs are done, accommodations, adaptations. And as Keenan pointed out earlier, so often we have found that accommodations and adaptations made for potentially a person with disability often have universal applications right across their entire, the employer, across the entire labor force. So we're, in a nutshell, looking for somebody who can get the job done, do the job well, and that's all employers are looking for. And it's, as labor markets tighten up and economies ebb and flow and all that sort of stuff, a valuable worker is more valued than ever. So that's what the message we send to employers, and we work with employers, that there's a large untapped pool of exceptional candidates who are ready, willing, and able to do the job, and that working with us, we can connect them to good employers.
Okay, so speaking of differences in the labor market, one more question I have for you before we move on. We sometimes think it can be easier or harder to find a job based on where you live or what your interests are or other factors, or sometimes the economy makes it harder for job seekers to find work, period. Can you talk about some of those external factors and how we can think about those things that we can't always control?
I suppose the short answer for that question is yes, but the reality is the economy always changes. RWA has been around for 10 years. LiveWorkPlay, as Keenan has pointed out, has been around since the 90s. We've weathered every type of economy up and down. To be honest, when the latest tariffs kind of hurrah started, we had to look back at all our job generation, and honestly, the different varying economies over the last 10 years have not actually really affected the ability or the rate at which we have worked with employers to generate jobs. Employers are always looking to hire. There will always be external factors. Is it easier to get a job in a big city than a small city? Potentially. Is it easier to get a job sometimes, when the economy is booming versus not? Of course. But these are factors that affect everyone. And the labor force keeps moving on, and we all keep moving on. So the idea that experience or those external factors will negatively impact somebody with a disability, or should or could or be expected to, in a way they wouldn't be experienced by everybody else, is just not true. The reality is there's always going to be employers who are looking for people to work. Doors open, doors close, and certainly none of the external factors should prevent people from doing it. But I did want to just for a second, something that Keenan said earlier. It's true that too many people, I think, use those kinds of things to not enter the labor force, to presume there is a level of security by remaining outside, participating fully in the labor force. And that's a shame, because that's where opportunities stop before they even begin. You can't be afraid to get in there. We all navigate that road. It should be a road that job seekers with an intellectual disability or autism are able to navigate as well. And with our assistance and assistance of many other organizations and programs like LiveWorkPlay, they can. So I don't think that anybody should be cognizant of the outside factors, but not deterred by them either.
Right. So we need to start with the belief that employment is possible. We need to expect that we shouldn't spend our life training for employment, that we can dive right in and try and fail potentially. And we need to see that despite changes in the labor market, there's still opportunity. That's what I hear you saying. So we've talked about what the job seeker can think about to be ready for work, and we've talked about the employer's perspective. Before we move on to the employment support provider, I think we should talk a little bit about the change in the employment support system that's happened in Ontario over the last few years. Ontario has moved from ODSP, Ontario Disability Support Program Employment Supports, to Employment Ontario, where people with disabilities and other job seekers can access support from employment support providers to find a job. We have a short clip from Sarah Birch from the Ontario Disability Employment Network with a high-level overview of how people can access support to find a job and what that experience might be like.
Hi there, I want to tell you a little bit about how job seekers can access job supports under Employment Ontario and how employment service providers can help you in your job search. Under this system, you get to choose which employment service provider you want to work with. Think of it like picking a new phone or an internet plan. You want the right match, not just the first option. You have the power to choose what's best for you. Once you've found the right provider, you should feel supported, like you have a team that's really invested in helping you succeed. You can expect a thorough process with many questions designed to get to know you. This is called an intake process. Similar to when you go to a new doctor or a dentist, they need to get to know you in order to support you properly. They'll ask about your interests, your work or volunteer history, and your goals, and help to match you to the right job. This is a collaborative process that you are an active part of, so the employment service provider and you will work together. You're not going to walk in on day one and have a job, but together you'll build a plan and take steps toward meaningful employment. Along the way, employment service providers can help with things like preparing your resume, practicing for interviews, exploring job options, and connecting with employers. Some can also help with training, on-site job coaching, or supports like transportation and work gear. Not every provider offers the same services, so if things like job coaching or other specific supports are important to you, be sure to ask about them so you can find the right fit. By asking questions, you'll get a clearer picture of how they can support you and help you reach your goals. Don't be afraid to ask questions like, what kinds of supports do you offer? What types of employers do you work with? How will you help me reach my goals? Or what can I expect from the process? Take the time to explore your options and find the best match for you. To help find providers in your area, you can check out the membership page on the Ontario Disability Employment Network's website, or you can do a web search using your location and search terms like employment services, job support, disability employment services, or supported employment. Your goals matter. Under the Employment Ontario system, you can take charge of your job search. Ask questions, choose the best fit, and find the support that's right for you.
Keenan, we know that Employment Ontario is operated regionally and that there may be differences from region to region among individual employment service providers. Sarah mentioned that people get to choose who they want to work with. I think that's incredibly important. Can you give some idea, though, about things job seekers might want to ask when they are trying to find a good fit with an employment service provider? How can someone make an informed decision about who they work with?
That's a great question. I think often they're able to do some of their own research. So once you found out the list of providers that are available to you, you can go to their websites and get a sense of what they're all about. And that might actually help you develop some additional questions. I think perhaps one of the most obvious but really important is do they have experience working with people who align with the type of disability that you identify? So do they actually have a pattern of success of supporting people with intellectual disabilities or autistic persons with employment? And I think beyond that, what are the types of jobs? What are some of the employers? And is there a way you can go look at that and learn more about it? Do they have, videos or testimonials from employers and employees? What is their kind of performance record with the population in question? I think that's really critical because, if someone comes to LiveWorkPlay that has a different disability than we are familiar working with, we would we would always attempt to refer them to someone more appropriate, unless they had some particular reason why they really wanted us to be involved. But, we would quickly say, okay, well, I know Agency X, which has a great track record of working with people with your type of employment profile, and you might be wanting to approach them, and I could help introduce you, that sort of thing. So I think that's really important, make sure it's the right expertise for what you're looking for. But beyond that, it's not all about disability, but also what are your career interests? Yep. If it's in a field where a certain provider has never had anyone, work in that field, maybe someone else is a better fit because they have the type of connections you're looking for. So that's something people might not think of. If we just ask, have you ever helped get people jobs? What if it's all in food service? And you don't want to work in food service? Maybe that's not a good fit for you. So I think there's a lot of interesting and creative questions, and you can learn a lot by doing your own research and kind of build up your dossier of what you think they're all about. And then when you have the conversation, you can ask some really informed questions.
And then what can people expect when they begin that process of working with a particular service provider?
Yeah, I think one of the changes with Employment Ontario, at least for us as a former ODSP provider, there's always been Employment Ontario, but ODSP employment service providers have been rolled into that system. And one of the changes that we're experiencing is that the way the intake process is quite different. So systemically, we're required to ask certain questions and go through certain processes that we wouldn't have followed in the past. So that's just something that's universal. Everyone has to do that. So in the beginning, if you're sitting there and you're going, well, these questions don't seem important to me for getting a job, it's because it's part of the system. It needs to go into the database. There are people tracking certain things that they want to track, and it's not a reflection on the service provider. So once we get through that process, you've decided to work together, then the particular style and model of the service provider will come into play with you, and you'll work on that together.
Okay, so you've made it through that process, Keenan, and then you get to meet a job developer, let's say. Tell us a little bit about the job developer role. How can they help someone find a job?
Good question. So every service provider does this a little bit differently, and I'm not sure how common our particular model is. We've developed it for the particular population that we work with, and the way we choose to work with employers. So we have what's called a discovery specialist, and that is the first person that will work with the job seeker. And then we have workplace inclusion specialists who typically spend their time with employers developing the job. So I maybe that aligned with the job developer title that some others use, but we actually divide up those roles. And so what happens for us is the discovery specialist is getting to know the person, the type of career they're looking for, their strengths, things they're concerned about, all of that, getting to know you to place the person as best as possible. So we know from the job seeker perspective, like what would be a good match for them. And then simultaneous with that, we've got the workplace inclusion specialists are constantly speaking with employers and identifying opportunities. So we're using that system to make a match. And then when we think we've got one, we bring all those people together and we develop an employment plan, a training and employment plan. So how is the person going to be onboarded? What kind of training is required before the day starts? On the first day, who's the supervisor? Who's responsible? What are the lines of communication? All of that work. So our particular model at LiveWorkPlay is focused on us not being physically present once the job starts, which is a little different from some others. We've worked really hard on that. And that's why we divide up the roles the way that we do. Others do it differently, and it still results in great jobs. So there's no one right way to do it. This is just the way that we've decided to do it.
Right, but you raise an interesting point that you can inquire a little bit about that process and decide what you think might work better for you. Do you have anything to add to that, Frank?
Yeah, so as Keenan pointed out, many organizations do it differently, and RWA does it differently again. Just for most of what's happening at a sort of agency level, LiveWorkPlay and others, no matter how it's particularly shaped, is very much person-led. So you're going to the employer with a particular person in mind. You're looking to sort of mesh that job in person, but it starts from meeting the job seeker and all that. RWA, we aren't connected directly to the participants. We do it through our relationship with partner agencies. So what we do is we approach employers from a demand-driven model, which is we're not looking for an employer to offer us a job for an individual. We're looking for an employer to offer us a job which we will share with these populations, and they will get a job seeker with an intellectual disability or autism. So we work with the employers, we lead them through a job generation trajectory. Those jobs are shared with us, and then we connect them to our agency partners like LiveWorkPlay. And having already done their discovery in that with their clients, if the job we generate happens to intersect with the interests and abilities and skills of one of their clients, then the match is made at that end. So what we do is very demand driven, but it complements what's happening at an agency level. And so those sort of two aspects of job development, whether it's individual, sort of really individual focused, or whether it's more demand group focused, mesh together and end up providing hopefully more opportunities for job seekers to choose from.
Oh, Frank, I really like that idea of thinking about a two-pronged approach at this. There's not just one entry point into the job market in this way. So, Keenan, today as we're talking a little bit to people really who are job seekers, I think it might be helpful for them to understand what that first meeting would be like at your organization, for instance, with a discovery specialist. What are they looking for in that meeting? What are they looking to learn from the job seeker?
Yeah, it's really important. And I think the first thing is, where are they at in their employment journey? So we do have job seekers actually have a very clear picture. They may even know exactly the employer they're looking for or what job they're looking for. And so that would be quite a different conversation from we often have people, they have had very little work experience or maybe no work experience, and they're kind of wide open. I really want to work. I'm not sure. And so there's a couple different conversations there. In the case of the person without very much work experience, we would ask, what they do have, learn about their interests, see if there's some potential that leads us to suggestions of different sectors that might work for them. And we have a lot of relationships with employers where we could actually introduce job seekers to different workplace environments, not for an interview or not because they're going to work there, just to see what it's like. Maybe they think this type of work is something they're interested in, but they really don't know. Well, actually, we can introduce you to a great person and other people who work in this field, and you can see what it's like. And let's see if that really interests you, and learn from that and move on. Other people with a really particular focus, they already know what they want or think they know exactly what they want. Maybe there's some issues with that, like, well, actually, we've spoken to that employer, and not only are they not hiring right now, it's not looking so good. So what can we do from that? Based on you have this clear vision, would you consider these other opportunities that are adjacent or aligned? Or maybe the employer is different and the job's slightly different. So it really depends on the individual. But I think our main goal in that first meeting is really, what's this person all about? Like, what kind of career do they have in mind? And how can we best serve that? And then I think very quickly, once we get through that sort of stage and have a vision of that, it's working with our workplace inclusion specialists and putting it out there. Look, I've got this great guy. Here's what he's all about. Here's his skill set. Here's his education experience. And here's what he's looking for. What do we have that's a match for this? And if we don't have it, we have to go develop it. It's even better with what Frank was describing. It's even better if RWA has already come to us and they've got a great employer who's just looking for this type of person. They're like, oh man, bingo, that's a perfect fit for that RWA partner. And I know they're ready to hire. So let's get moving.
Fantastic. Thanks for explaining kind of both sides to that. Keenan, I know that families are often very interested in the job seeking process for their loved one. If we have a job developer, an employment specialist as a bridge between the employer and a potential employee, what can families think about as their role in the process?
Great question. So I think our model and potentially a model others use can be very confusing to family members because they might be expecting the processes will be sitting down and going through want ads and maybe pounding the pavement and handing out resumes. And just in our experience, that is so ineffective as to be almost, not worth any time at all. But it's confusing to them because they're not seeing the type of actions that perhaps they experienced in their own initial job searches in their life. And so they may be wondering what exactly is going on. And so I think it's that initial investment of understanding how the process works. And then if the agency is demonstrating success in supporting people like your loved one, understand the process to the point where you feel some trust in the process and let it play out. But be clear, like what kind of communication you're looking for, and what kind of information you want to know, and make sure that the provider has agreed to that expectation, so that there's no feelings that you're not getting what you're looking for, or you want to keep a nice healthy relationship. But I think that's really important. I think the most common thing that happens to us in the early stages of the process is the family member feels like nothing's happening because maybe less time is being spent with their loved one than they think is necessary. But what's actually happening is we're actually spending time with the employer developing the opportunity, because we already feel we know what we need to know. And now it's just how do we get the right fit for the job seeker? And then for us too, it's a learning process. We have to understand with the individual and the family what their expectations are, because it's not really good enough to tell them, don't worry about it, we're doing things. That's not fair. So making sure that we are meeting their expectations of understanding where we are in the process, what they can expect, why they are or not hearing from us according to a certain frequency. So all that's really important, and we've had to work really hard on that in the system where we are serving a lot of people. There's a lot of balls in the air, but at the heart of it all, if people aren't feeling good about the process, that's not going to help their job search. So it's really important that we all work together.
Frank, do you have anything to add about the role of families in this process?
Well, I 100% agree with what Keenan was saying. And, it is really important to have reasonable expectations for what's going to happen, that the trajectory is, it's a not uneven journey. Let's put it that way for all of us. And I think so too for any job seekers with an intellectual disability or with autism. But I think it's also important to know where a sense of differentiate between support and where job seeker autonomy has to come into this too. Yes, it is very important for families and those support networks, those first people that all of us rely on as we enter the labor force, to be supportive, to be realistic, to temper expectations, or and all those sorts of things. But it does rest with the job seeker. Ultimately, that needs to be a bit of self-motivation. How do you support self-motivation as opposed to enforced motivation type of differentiation? We have, for example, RWA, we have autism outreach coordinator positions across the country. And we have a tool called the Compass, where if you're on the spectrum and you're looking for assistance with employment, you can go in on this tool. It connects you to our AOC, who will then, learn about what type of support you're looking for, or agency relationship, and then navigate you out with referrals to many of our agency partners. And we've actually had to put a disclaimer on that, because we've had so many parents who are engaging with us without their children's knowledge that they're doing this. And so it's really about, and I understand that. I understand, just sometimes the frustration with the system and their desire to see their child sort of, have the same opportunity and the same sort of journey that all of us make. But it needs to be differentiating between supporting somebody to be self-motivated in that area versus sort of feeling you can sort of control and do the road for them, and it's somehow to be then a journey that is without risk. I mean, that's just not realistic. So I think it's about really wanting to get in the labor force, understanding what that journey is going to be like, knowing what you're looking for in a partner, but really working with the individual so it is their journey and they are discovering it and moving along, and that you know when to, I mean, I hesitate to use the word step back, but you know at some point when that person needs to go and the risk needs to be theirs.
Yeah, this is a tricky thing to navigate. I think we all want to see our family members succeed. But it can be hard to move through the bumps along the way, and as people find their way through this employment journey. And acknowledging, yes, Keenan, you said before, it can take time to find a job. It may take longer to find the right kind of job. Going back to you, Keenan, do you have any advice for people who have had a hard time finding or keeping a job? Are there strategies they may consider to keep going in this job search if it seems like it's an ongoing process?
Yeah, I mean, there could be so many different reasons for that, but one of the common patterns we've noticed with the particular population that we serve is sometimes there may have been, possibilities framed for them in a limited way where they think that they're supposed to work in one particular type of job, and they keep trying and trying and trying to make that fit. It is very common that this happens with high school co-ops and things where food services is prioritized. And it's very interesting, they're working food, and you talk to the person, you go, what kind of workplace would you like? Well, I would like, it should be quiet. I would like the pacing to be, and they're like, okay, that is like the opposite of what has been recommended for you. And so it's not surprising that, you're in a loud, fast-paced environment. People are literally shouting at you because it's part of the culture. You got to do this, you got to do that. It seems like the opposite of what would work for you. And I think, the biggest, I wouldn't say a surprise, but the biggest success story of the past 10 years with LiveWorkPlay is the number of people with intellectual disabilities who are in office jobs. And this has traditionally been just completely, don't even think about it. It's not going to happen for you. It's not healthy to think that you're going to work in one of those office buildings. And actually, we've had just tremendous success. We broke into the federal public service. We have over 45 people with permanent jobs in the federal public service now, which just seems mind-blowing because we were like, gee, if we could just get one. And so it's opened all kinds of doors. And so it's the same with the corporate world, who, again, have very large infrastructures, and it may seem not possible, but there's an awful lot of jobs going on in those big buildings. And it just takes a bit of creativity and conversations, or someone to open the door like RWA has done by having those high-level conversations, which can be very hard sometimes for a local service provider. Just making the right conversations or getting the right introductions perhaps is a challenge. But getting back to your actual question, I think for the job seeker, obviously, don't give up sounds a bit trite, but I think, can we think differently about why that's happening? And maybe there's something really different we should be trying, other than going back to the same doors again and again and expecting a different result. Maybe you're in the wrong line of work and you haven't gotten the right help.
I think it's important. I couldn't agree more. Do job seekers have trouble retaining jobs as well as attaining jobs? Sure. But we have to define what we mean by retention and what the goals are before we sort of weigh in. I mean, for too long, as we said earlier, this idea was somebody would get a job and that would be it. That would be, and success was that they were still doing the same thing in the same way 25 years later. That's retention. But if the person is doing it because they have no other choice or be given no other choice, it's hard to see that as a success. Is that, yes, they retained the job, but I mean, I'm not sure we'd break out the candles and the cake quite yet. I mean, I think it's discovering, is their inability to retain the job because they don't want to be there, because they're unsupported, because it has something specific to do. There's a host of intersecting reasons that really need to be examined before sort of hands up in the air and say, well, this person has trouble retaining a job. I mean, too often that label gets applied on a personal level when it's any number of factors. So we need to, is the job worth retaining? Do they want to retain it? There's a whole world there of things that intersect with that question that need to be asked, and that's where you need a good agency like LiveWorkPlay on your side that can work with you through all of that and through the discovery process and through that journey. Back to what parents said, it's not one and done. I mean, they're going to get out there, they're going to get jobs. Some will work, some won't for a variety of reasons. And, that's no different than any of us. That's reality.
Right. So again, it's going back to what we talked about at the beginning, that belief, first of all, that employment's possible and that good employment that suits us is possible. But Frank, you were kind of touching on something that I want to talk a little bit more about, the idea of jobs kind of building into a career, or even the idea of entrepreneurship. I know you have thoughts about employment being more than just a job. And so please talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, simply, I mean, why should an employee, a job seeker with an intellectual disability, or why should their job trajectory be any different than any of ours? I mean, career advancement should be a possibility, should be a probability. I mean, never mind possibility. And for too long, it's not. I mean, this goes back to the idea of retention, right? So, employers for too long, if you don't work well with an employer, it's easy to other the person. It's easy to say that that's what they do. This was the job we got. Somehow that the conditions of this job and how the person do it exist outside their colleagues who do the same job. So it's about working with employers to build intentional career ladders for people with disabilities and ensure that the programs like professional development, accessibility, and support, and all those things they have internally don't unfairly discriminate against persons with disabilities. It's also working with the employer to ensure that, yes, you've worked with RWA and you've worked with LiveWorkPlay, but to what Keenan said earlier, like, we remove ourselves from the process and we will support you, but this person got the job. This isn't a placement. Right. We didn't place somebody somewhere. They earned the job. We worked with you. You're now hopefully a stronger employer. They're working together. They should benefit from the same ability to advance as anybody else, and you should be able to work with them. And then we work with those employers to ensure, as I said, that their policies and practices don't discriminate against that. But to bring it back even further to our conversation, and also the person has to know that that's a choice, that's a possibility. Yeah. Somebody doing the same job for 25 years should be because that person wants to. That's their choice, not because it's the only one. So it's about working, again, with job seekers and with families and with the support of their agencies, knowing what's possible, what I'd like to do. That so often advancement isn't even through a single employer. It's through a number of employers and jobs. I did this, I'd like to do this. And having an agency support them to that discovery process as well, which can be very different than just simply finding the first job. So, we believe that should be available to everyone. I mean, as for entrepreneurial, same sort of thing. I mean, some people work best for themselves, and we should be able to support that. Unfortunately, that is probably one of the areas where there's the least amount of support right now for persons with an intellectual disability or autism. A lot of the disability-specific agencies don't have entrepreneurial expertise. A lot of the entrepreneurial agencies and programs don't have disability expertise, and so it's difficult to meet in the middle. There are some who do, and we work with them, and we try to sort of, at RWA, we not only will assist in terms of on-the-job supports for entrepreneurs, but we also have a granting program too that will match a certain degree of primary funding to hopefully get them over those financial hurdles. So work with them as much as we can, but it's probably the area that needs the most development, I would say, in an agency level right now.
Fair. Again, it's really, though, about expanding our thought about what employment is. It's not just looking for that single outcome of getting and holding on to that job. We should be really encouraging people with developmental, intellectual disabilities, autism, to think beyond that first milestone and look really broadly about what the future might hold. Okay, we've shared a lot in this webcast and hopefully help people to understand what they can expect in their job search. Okay, so before we move to the Q&A, I'd like to give you both an opportunity for one last thought. Keenan, I'm going to start with you.
Sure, I just wanted to make it clear. I think I mentioned a bit earlier about how some of the processes at the beginning of kind of engaging with the Employment Ontario system, it might not feel the most human or the most natural, because it isn't. So we're generating data for a database that's required of us, and it's not a natural conversation about employment. I just wanted to say, hopefully it's clear from listening to Frank and myself that we're really passionate. We just want people to have good jobs and good careers. And that speaks to our, my whole team and Frank's whole team. And so once you get through some of those awkward moments in the beginning for the job seeker as well as for the family member, it may feel very disorienting. This is not what I heard about Live Work Play or RWA. Those things we have to do, and we'll do them together and we'll do them respectfully. And when we get past that, we will deal with you as the wonderful human being that you are and get to know you and support you on your career journey.
Yeah. And we want to have belief that there are lots of good organizations like that. Frank, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, first of all, I couldn't agree more with what Keenan said. I mean, the power of a good agency support is irreplaceable. I mean, I can't encourage people enough to explore that. And if people are interested, RWA has an online resource hub called theinclusiveworkplace.ca. It has materials and resources aimed at employers, at agencies, and for job seekers and those who support them. And one of the key things is about the power of connecting with an agency and how you can work together towards your employment goals. So, I encourage people to go see that. I'd also encourage them, support with your dollars, right? There's employers all around. Employers are more and more willing to hire inclusively. I mean, I can definitively say that. It's a different conversation that our labor market facilitators across the country have in 2025 than they had when this started in 2014. It's much more of it's about working with employers now around the mechanics, around how these job seekers complement their workforce and how it makes it richer and makes them richer and more profitable as an employer. And as not only can you support loved ones who are looking for work, but you can support employers who hire inclusively. When you're shopping, ask, are you an inclusive employer? Do you hire inclusively? We all have that power as well, and to support those businesses who do it well, and hire. But don't settle for the thing on the website. Everyone's got a blurb on their website about diversity. The only thing that makes an inclusive employer is if they actually employ people with disabilities. So, but go ask the questions, support the right employers, and get out there and get in the labor force.
Thank you both so much. I am so thrilled to be part of this conversation and the passion that both of you have sort of raised the bar on inclusive employment. Let's move now to the Q&A.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for the Q&A portion of our presentation this evening. I'm so happy to have on the line with me Frank and Keenan. Hello to both of you.
Hello, hello.
Good evening.
Great to have you. Before we get started, I just want to remind folks about a couple things or some questions in the chat. Yes, you will receive the opportunity to watch a video replay of tonight's broadcast, including the Q&A portion. That link should be prepared for you within 24 hours. You can go back and watch that and share the link with other people who might find this content interesting. The other thing is that all the resources that we spoke about tonight and others are in the resources tab at the top of your screen. Again, bookmark that page so you can go back to it if you find that useful. And before you leave tonight, please make sure to click on the feedback tab so that we can hear what you thought of tonight's webcast, and if you have other ideas for things that we can be doing in terms of content at P4P. So let's dive into the questions. I had originally looked and thought, oh, we didn't have a lot, Frank and Keenan, but now they've been popping up. So we'll have a good discussion. I want to start with, there was a couple of questions here that we can start with around young people and employment. Two questions, in fact, that we're asking about. Are there agencies or supports that really look at helping young people have their first job or summer employment? Can either of you speak to that for youth in Ontario right now? Maybe we'll start with you, Keenan.
Okay, I think we can both speak to that for sure.
I bet.
I think just number one is to say the importance of the question. So I know RWA and Inclusion Canada and others have done the research that shows this to be true, but we know from experience that those who have ideally some paid work experience during the high school years, it really dramatically increases your odds post high school. So we definitely encourage people to investigate that. As to the resources available to support that, it's one of those challenging constructs because when you're still in the education system, other systems tend to be not well integrated. And so over the years, just speaking for our agency, we've had basically project funding from places like United Way, and actually Reading Will Enable themselves have provided us with grants or projects where we've been able to serve a limited number of youth in the school system in that way. And it was wonderful. We would like to do more, and we definitely encourage people who have any opportunity to influence that thinking. If we can kind of influence systems, including Employment Ontario, to think about how to extend services down into the high school years, we think it'd be really valuable. And certainly we've had great experiences supporting that summer employment as well as part-time employment during the school years. But there may be locally, there may be different projects, whether it's United Ways or Rotary clubs, or there's all kinds of other places where they may be supporting pockets of that. But as far as I know, systems-wide across Ontario, there is not a dedicated employment supports opportunities for people still in school.
Okay. I mean, that's still really important to understand, Keenan, and the fact that people can be vocal and looking for opportunities and saying this is what we want is really important.
Absolutely.
There was a question here, and I don't know if Frank wants to speak to this. There were a parent was talking about the fact that they have one child with a developmental or intellectual disability and another with a physical disability, and that employers are not very accommodating in terms of supporting a physical disability. Is this something I don't know that you're finding, Frank, that there's people are experiencing this when they're looking for employment?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. We deal now in RWA, of course, the populations we serve are those with an intellectual disability or with autism. So, our experience, the bulk of our experience happens to be, in dealing with employers in terms of the intersection with those particular disabilities. That being said, I mean, certainly we deal with a lot of agencies. We have over 250 agency partners across the country, many of which are cross disability.
Mm.
And certainly have connections into other community groups that are cross disability. I think it's really hard to sort of, you don't want to generalize, but at the same time, it's hard not to generalize. Generally speaking, employers are not always the most accommodating, period.
Mm.
And I would think I have no reason to. I've certainly seen nothing that says that where physical disability is concerned, they're either more or less accommodating than in terms of the populations we serve. But I would it's certainly been my experience that yeah, it's not always a very it's not something that employers are always that willing to do. But that being said, we've found a lot that are. I mean, the question I would have, or not question, I suppose, is this is why you would really ideally want to be connected to a good agency like LiveWorkPlay. You need people advocating on your behalf. You need people who are going to go in there. It's a hard fight to do it on your own. And you really need this sort of expertise. We often say when we deal with employers across the country, employers are already making a million accommodations in a million different ways for a million different reasons for their employees. We're simply with the accommodations that we sometimes ask them to make in terms of ones that may be at the beginning disability specific are simply ones that we're trying to widen their HR toolbox and often have applications universally beyond a population with disabilities. So hopefully, having an agency on your side and someone that can advocate and say those sorts of things to employers gets them to see that what you're asking for is really not that different from what they're already doing. It's just shifts in perspective. As for the willingness, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, not all employers are all that willing to do it, and some, are different parts of the journey, and you've got to walk with them.
Yeah, I think thanks for that, Frank. I think that's important to understand kind of what the mindset can be and how we might need people around us to help us with that advocacy. Keenan, I wondered if you could speak to, as we were chatting about this, some questions came in, and I think it might be helpful to understand, this shift in the way people are accessing Employment Ontario now. There used to be, or I should say, there are organizations that were really focused in a particular area. So supporting people with developmental disabilities, for instance, or supporting people with physical disabilities, for instance. And with that, with this shift in Employment Ontario, how is that how is that happening? Or how are families finding out, or people and families finding out about organizations that really have a particular expertise in an area?
Yes, I think it could be a bit of a struggle. I think, there's lots of benefits to having kind of a one-door approach through, Employment Ontario website, and then it helps you. You can tunnel down to your own area, and then it'll show you the different providers, and you can do some of your own research. But it could take a while, and I guess, one of the natural variances between communities, there may be an organization that's specializing in a similar way as LiveWorkPlay in your area, or there may not be. And so there is let's just say a more generic provider, but they may have a certain number of employment specialists on staff that are designated to work with unique populations. So it can be a little hard to understand all of that at the face of things. So hopefully finding some people to have a good conversation with and tunnel down a bit to see what's happening in that particular area. But yeah, it is a little different. The system is definitely, it's required to serve all people in all areas. So it's not acceptable. The idea that, oh, well, if you have a disability in this region, don't bother trying. No, that Employment Ontario is required to provide you services. So stick with it, and that should be the end result, is that you are matched with an agency and an employment specialist to provide those supports. That said, they have no way of recreating, we have 30 years of experience, so you don't learn all those things overnight, like even with what Frank was just discussing. So one of the things we do a lot of is this job development. So we know a lot about which employers have different processes for supporting people with inclusive employment, and which do not, and which are a work in progress. So that kind of local knowledge and expertise makes a big difference.
Mm. Sorry, and on the flip side of this, there was a question that you might want to just tag on. Kathy wrote, my son is fairly high functioning, doesn't identify as having a disability, and therefore doesn't want to work with an agency geared towards persons with disabilities. So in this case, for them, an agency, this setup is kind of ideal. They're working with a more generalized agency that might be able to support them in their job search without necessarily identifying someone as having a disability or not.
Absolutely. And depending where you are, there's quite a number of choices in most regions. So totally respect that decision. And we at times take people who are not quite in our traditional let's just say, range of service, or what we're typically associated with, but they like what we're doing for other reasons, and they do understand what we do, and they ask, like, I don't really have an intellectual disability, but I really would like that support. But we also have people that say, well, I do identify as an autistic person or a person with intellectual disability, but actually don't want to work with you because I don't, we're totally cool with that. And we're like, okay, there actually is this other agency, and speak to Linda, and she'll understand where you're coming from with that. And, we wish you all the best. Totally fine. And that should be hopefully the response that, there's enough work to go around, and there's no reason to, we're not trying to bring in people who would benefit from working with somebody different.
Fantastic. All right. There were some questions related to ODSP. So someone asked, can individuals not yet approved for ODSP still access Employment Ontario services? I don't know if that's still a Keenan question. Do you know, Keenan?
Yes, they can. So I guess that would be one of the benefits of the new system is, one of the benefits of through the ODSP employment supports was there was a bit of a seamless transition between if you approve for benefits, then you were approved for the employment supports. But it is not a prerequisite for Employment Ontario. There are actually many more Employment Ontario clients who are not receiving ODSP or any other type of benefit. Actually, they would just be streamed a bit differently on our end, but for them, it's not a barrier.
Okay. So the process then is folks can just go directly to looking for local Employment Ontario services in their area.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, Frank, I'm going to bring you in on a question someone just asked.
Sure.
If an employment agency doesn't have a partner like RWA, what's the best way to introduce yourself and your supported employment program to potential employers?
Well, most employment agencies, I mean, we kind of, RWA is kind of an add-on to employment agencies, for lack of a better word, in the sense that we generate additional demand and complement and supplement what's happening already in the community. So any agency kind of worth their salt will already have those inroads in terms of going to employers, and certainly, developing long before RWA ever came on the scene, and probably long after RWA ever leaves the scene. That being said, in terms of approach to employers, we are very much, the RWA model is very much a demand-driven one. We go in, we engage with employers, we make the business case for inclusive hiring period, and that it can be certainly a way to enhance the diversity, innovation of their bottom line. And it's usually a very economically sound sort of thing. We're very much deliberately not a charity model. And we are about inclusive employment, and as I said, very demand driven, and how that connects to a very large pool of candidates through our agency partners. So we take a very sort of front door approach to employers, and talk about the benefits of inclusive hiring. For anyone's interested, we do have an online resource hub called the inclusiveworkplace.ca that has a lot of stuff on there for employers, agencies, and job seekers. And there may be some, if they care to visit that, a lot more resources there about how we deal with employers, and ways other people can deal with employers in terms of having those first conversations about inclusive employment. So that's kind of the direction we take. And is in terms of agencies not having RWA as a partner, as I said, Canada is very lucky in that we have a very rich network of supported employment agencies across the country, often working, making bricks without mud or straw, given much PT investment these days. And so these are the folks who know how to sort of get in the door and work with the employers. It's interesting, if I could just take 1 second to go back to a question. We're talking about somebody who didn't identify as having a disability. One of the big challenges we have as a program is, how do we connect the opportunities we generate to people who are outside of the agency system, either by choice or or not, or lack of choice. And it really is a challenge. We have a lot of stuff on disclosure on our website, and certainly understand why somebody would or would not want to participate in the agency system. 100% autonomy is, when we talk about agency, the primary agency has to be that of the person. But that being said, too, it's worth reflecting that we talk about the duty of employers to accommodate, and that's certainly true, but they can only accommodate what they know.
Yeah.
So it's about sort of reflecting about, I would never say to anybody, disclose if you're not ready, or identify differently if you don't. But really, one of the factors has to be, when in considering those sorts of things, if we're looking for reasonable accommodations, if it's something where you want the employer to meet you halfway, things like that, there has to be an exchange of information. So I would encourage that, beyond looking for other routes, which is true, have really a really good think, and get as many resources as you can, talking about the nature of disclosure, why disclosure, what it can do as a tool for you, as a tool to enhance your agency, not take from it. So I just wanted to sort of throw that out there.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you did. Thank you for that. There's a question here, and this is a tricky one to answer, but I think Keenan, you have it in you. So Julie mentioned that for their loved one or their family member, perhaps they see ODSP as a bit of what she calls a golden handcuff. The fact that their family member is receiving support means that perhaps they're not working to their fullest potential, or not motivated to work towards a career. And I wonder if you could speak to that idea a little bit, that being on ODSP restricts people from being motivated to reach employment goals.
Right. Well, I definitely don't have the magic answer to that motivation question. I would just say that we have worked with a lot of people and families over the years where either the person doesn't have a clear idea of what they want to do, or they're just presenting as having uh, reluctance. And I think, you know, I think any specialist employment provider would know that really the only opportunity there is, let's just get to know the person and their interests and see if there might be a match somewhere in the labor market. And I would say we have had a lot of success with that, because people don't always aren't able to draw a line between their interests and employment opportunities. And it may come from the fact too that the type of job opportunities they've been presented with are very limited.
Mm.
It is typical of populations identified with a disability to perhaps have been told that, your job options are limited to this, this very small number of opportunities. And that is not at all true. And we've proven that over the course of many years with people working in, office environments and things that were thought to be perhaps not suitable for our population. That's been proven incorrect. So basically, we don't have put any limits on what is possible, and just really try to get to know the person and their interests, and put some thought into it of all the employers in our network and everything else that we've done. Do we think there's maybe a match here? And the person might like to go into a non-pressure type investigation. Like we have employers where they're totally cool if we just bring someone for a visit, and it's not an interview. It's We're not asking anyone to be hired or to take a job, but come and see what they do here. And that has been a successful way of helping some people decide, actually, yeah, I'd like to learn more about that, and this seems like
Mm.
a cool place to work, that sort of thing. So we've had some good results with that.
Well, that's great that you mentioned that. There was a comment or question about um, families, teachers believing that their family members have, no other interests in video games and being online. Have you found success in supporting youth with ability to enter this type of workforce in the technology, video game, graphic design, things that are related to that? Because you're right, I think there's a stereotype that there's only certain types of jobs available for people when they're labeled with a disability.
Absolutely. And yeah, some interesting projects. We just got into a project with actually Finance Canada, just here in Ottawa. The federal government is a big employer, but people might not think that's necessarily a traditional path for people with intellectual disabilities, for example, but many have the interest and skills and experience in the digital world, and it may not translate directly into the gaming industry, because that's a very competitive field, and it's certainly a possibility for anybody. But working on digitization projects and things, that may also work for someone if you're getting money and doing something that is adjacent to your favorite pastime. So we just had several people hired for a digitization project with Finance Canada, and it's been really successful. They are working up to a big announcement because they're finishing it's like 100,000 files will be completed ahead of schedule, and yeah, that's coming soon. So there'll be a big announcement, and hopefully it'll spark some other employers to think about those possibilities as well.
Mhm.
It is,
And Frank, yeah, please join us.
yeah, no worries. It's an interesting question. Just shows you how old some of the old myths just always seem to have such long legs in terms of going on. The reality is, RW, we've just passed 6,000 jobs generated and filled. And I can tell you the number 2 sector in terms of outcomes in the last 3 years has been the professional sector, including administration, finance, tech, for
Mm.
us. Believe it or not, the days of it being just sort of, retail only are gone. I mean, our experience working the last 11 years is that the demographics of the populations we serve in terms of job seekers with intellectual disability or autism aren't all that different than the demographics of the general public in terms of how many people are looking for entry level, the different sectors they're working in, ambitions, goals, all of these things. So, you'll find agencies, programs like ours and agencies across the country working to make inroads in a variety of areas. I mean, we've just, you talk about gaming. Our people in Vancouver over this past year have been working with EA Games, which is the big, one of the huge producers of video games with their location in Burnaby. So there's work happening and opportunities spread across. I think though something Keenan said, which is really important, is that it's not just these sorts of things, not just about a job for somebody. It's about planning a career, and that may take multiple steps, lateral moves. It's not 0 to 100 for any of us, the reality is. So that if someone has skills and ambitions in these areas, it's about like, okay, talking to, family resources, agencies. How can I scale up? Where do I need to be? What are the different moves to sort of move me towards that industry? It's about the trajectory of a career and the plan and the steps that may take to get there. But it's certainly possible. We're certainly talking to employers like that. I know organizations like Keenan's and that and agencies are certainly doing it. It's not a sort of it's not the sort of one-dimensional idea of, you will get placed in some sort of retail thing and that's where you will end up forever. I mean, those days are kind of gone, thankfully.
Yeah.
And we're working with people to sort of build career paths for all their ups and downs.
Amazing. There was a question that follows this in the chat. My son has a learning disability and ADD. He has a diploma in sound engineering. Can he be connected to audio employers? And the question, we may not get into the specifics of that, but what you've been talking about, I think, is very hopeful for families who may have thought that some of the ambitions of their family member is not possible. It is refreshing to hear that those myths are being changed with the work that you're doing. There was a question about, training on the job. Rose asks, responsibility for training is a shared responsibility between the employment agency and the employer. Is that is that correct? And are we talking about job coaches anymore? Do people have access to that? Can you speak to that? You want to go ahead, Keenan?
Well, this is really timely because Frank mentioned the inclusiveworkplace.ca. And they just put up 3 modules that they funded us to create. And it directly takes on, I believe the main heading, it's called Beyond Job Coaching. And so we actually address this topic head on. It's a little leading edge. And so I do not want to suggest that if you hear an agency is, really grounded in a job coaching model, like you should not go there. They may be extremely good at what they do, and just what counts is, are they getting people jobs that they want and having career success? But that said, our model is definitely, so we prefer to train the employer to be able to train all of their hires, including people with disabilities. So to the best of our ability, anyway, that is our goal, that when a person we have supported as an employment supports client, when they arrive at their first day on the job, that their experience is much like any other onboarded employee, where their main interaction is with their supervisor and their coworkers, and not a weird situation where a person from our agency is kind of hanging around, because it just sets the scene in a way that it just creates an instant stigma. It can't be helped. People are going to say, why is there 2 people instead of 1 person? So it does create certain problems if you overly reliant on the on-site job coaching model. So we try to put a lot of time into the upfront investment with the employer and the employee to make sure both of them are ready from day one, and that the employer, the supervisor, the coworkers, they're ready to be supervisors and coworkers, and that includes responsibility for training all new staff. And so our approach is, there may be accommodations needed in the training plan. We will definitely help with that, but we're not going to deliver the training plan. It's really important that the employer does that whenever possible.
Okay, and if people need supports on site, how does that all fit into that?
Exactly. So that would be it was part of the training plan, and so that is part of the accommodations that would be built into that plan. And it would depend on, not every employer would be equipped to, depending on what it is. So that would be part of our work, is We need an employer that has the capacity for the type of support that is required here, or the accessibility that's being requested. But yeah, I would need to know more about what that would be. But generally, as much as possible, you want the employer providing the accommodation and including any adaptations to training, or any adaptations required so the person can be successful on their own on the job. So often we have solved problems that were, it's assumed that there would have to be a different type of support, but we solved it by using visuals instead of written, or vice versa, or different ways of providing information to people, or providing tasks one at a time instead of a whole list. All sorts of different ways that on the job accommodations can be provided without necessarily inserting an outside agency presence.
Great. Those are great examples. Sorry, go ahead, Frank.
No, I was just going to say, I just wanted to back up what Keenan is saying. I mean, we see lots of different agencies using lots of different sort of models across. Job coaches are still very prevalent, and quite useful and necessary in certain instances. But what Keenan is doing, what LiveWorkPlay are doing, this sort of new development, or new direction, I think is crucial, because at the end of the day, it enriches the employer's HR abilities. So they're able to do this moving into the future. And I mean, that's how we get inclusive employment to be truly inclusive employment, is this stuff gets mainstreamed. It becomes another tool in their toolbox. They're then prepared to work with more and more people. And I mean, surely, ultimately, maybe it's a naive goal, but the goal of all of us is, to put ourselves in a business, because we would live in a labor force where there would just be that level of accommodation and understanding at the employers, that somebody with an intellectual disability or autism or any disability could say, I'm interested in that job. I feel I have the same shot at that job as everybody else. So anything that we can do, these sorts of developments that aid that, and aid employers, to make that journey and increase their knowledge and skill base, is crucial. Beyond just it being freeing for the individual, it is freeing for the employer. It addresses both sides of the equation, and hopefully leaves both parties with a more richer experience.
And just creates a more inclusive workplace community for the next person as well.
Exactly.
Fantastic. I'm getting close. I think we're getting close to wrapping up. I probably went way over time with this, but I'm curious. First of all, I wanted to say that inclusive workplace link is in our guide, or the resources for tonight. So if people heard that and are trying to figure it out or find it, don't worry, it's in the resources. You can go back to and access it. But I just, I wondered if you wanted to each take a moment just to wrap up, and perhaps offer for a lot of the families in the chat just starting out, just thinking about employment with their family member. Where can someone begin? What is your top tip to beginning? Frank, can I start with you?
My top tip to beginning. All right. I go back to the question someone had a couple of times about motivations. Just starting there, the top tip to beginning is believing that this is possible and it's beneficial and you should do it. The reality is, it's not just it's funny, even the motivation question, we even revisit the sort of lack of progress on ourselves as blame. But I mean, the reality is that clawbacks, other antiquated regulations that exist sort of in the intersection of many provincial and territorial sort of social welfare, disability support programs, etc., basically discourage potential job seekers from seeking long-term employment. There's a perception that to stay outside the competitive labor market brings a level of perceived stability, and that's simply not been borne out by facts. And what it also brings is just a lack of inclusivity. It just you already sort of limit your future right away. Now, I'm not going to make anyone's decision for them, but I think the first step is believing this is possible. It's a good road. It's a beneficial road. You can grow and you can lead a full, rich life and be a part of that. Now, after that, I think the next step is logically, for me, find a great agency like LiveWorkPlay. who will be your partner there and your advocate and help you sort of navigate those fields. But I think, my first top tip is to, really believe that this is possible and should happen.
I'm so glad that you said that, Frank. Yes, that's where I want people to start. Okay, Keenan, how can you follow that?
Very difficult.
Oh,
I would say so. Okay, I have a way. So definitely the belief piece is number one, because without that, the chances are very low. If a person and their key supporters don't actually believe that they can have an employment outcome, well, they probably won't, because the people that do believe will have a better shot at it. So, but developing that belief. So I would say spend some time. We talked about the inclusiveworkplace.ca, but there's also just the main Ready, Willing, Able website where you're going to see stories. There's places like hirefortalent.ca. You'll see other stories. And chances are, if you're not sure about things, you may well see a person in one of those videos and you're like, you know what? That reminds me of my son, or that reminds me of my daughter. We actually do that kind of in person with events that we have. We talk a lot about and share stories of employment success. And, we'll have people say literally, hey, my kid went to school with that kid. My kid could get a job. And so it's just kind of that belief, seeing as we're trying our best, and Ready, Willing, and Able, and Inclusion Canada and others, they're trying to share those employment stories so that people can see that it's real and not a made up thing, or it's not just about hope. There are real things
yeah.
that are practical steps, and there are really positive developments in employment. I'm very impatient about that. I want to see a lot more success. But if I go back to when I started in this field 30 years ago, I didn't really believe, because our own agency was creating sort of pseudo employment activities, because it was a lot harder. So part of my own changing belief is, well, I saw the results, and I'm now have so many relationships with employers that are calling me and they're excited, and they're like, we want to hire somebody else. We have a new job opportunity. We thought it'd be perfect for someone that could come through your network. So that is just a huge sea change, even if I would like to see things moving even faster than they are.
Absolutely. I appreciate that perspective. I hope that tonight's conversation leaves folks with that belief in themselves and their family members that there is possibility for employment in the future. Thank you so much, both of you, for our conversation tonight. I really enjoyed it. I just wanted to let folks know that upcoming webcasts that you might be interested in, come back and see me on February 11th with Understanding the Disability Tax Credit, and a different kind of webcast from tonight's topic, but still really important, the idea of strengthening your family network, because I know family-to-family connection is incredibly important, especially, Keenan, when you're thinking about telling stories and hearing other people's experiences. And we're doing that on February 17th. Again, thanks, Frank. Thanks, Keenan, for being here with me tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.